Winter 1944. Boston, Massachusetts. The raid siren split the December night like the cry of a wounded animal. Captain James Morrison had heard that sound 1,000 times in his mind since returning from the European theater. But tonight, his last night before shipping back out, it felt different, more final, more real. He stood outside Boston General Hospital, smoking his last cigarette, watching the chaos unfold. Staff and patients poured from the building's side exits in organized waves, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Civil defense wardens shouted instructions. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of what might have been thunder, or might have been something worse, rolled across the city. James pulled his leather bomber jacket tighter. The patches on his shoulders told his story. 8th Air Force, 91st Bombardment Group, 23 missions over Germany, 3 more than the required 20 to go home. But home wasn't home anymore. Not since Catherine. Move it. Everyone to the shelters. A warden rushed past, his armband glowing white in the darkness. That's when James saw her. A nurse, standing at the hospital's back entrance, her thin white uniform soaked through from the sleet that had started to fall. She was ushering the last of the elderly patients toward the shelter, her body trembling so violently he could see it from 30 feet away. No coat, no blanket, nothing but that regulation uniform that might as well have been tissue paper. She couldn't have been more than 25. Dark hair plastered to her face. Eyes focused, professional, even as her lips were turning blue. James didn't think. He crushed a cigarette under his boot and crossed the distance in 8 long strides. Here. He was already shrugging off his jacket. Take this. The nurse looked up, startled. Her eyes, gray, he noticed like storm clouds, widened. Sir, I can't. You can and you will. James draped the heavy leather over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame. I've got 3 layers under this. You're shaking hard enough to register on the Richter scale. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then her hands came up, clutching the jacket's lapels, and the relief that washed over her face made something in James's chest tighten. Thank you, she whispered. I had to give my coat to Mrs. Henderson. She's 86 and another tremor ran through her. God, that's warm. Thank you. What's your name? Eleanor. Eleanor Winters. She extended a hand, then seemed to remember they were in the middle of an air raid drill and dropped it awkwardly. The shelter, right behind you. James gestured toward the underground entrance. After you, Miss Winters. They descended the concrete steps together, joining the crowd of patients, nurses, doctors, and visitors packed into the hospital's basement shelter. The space smelled of antiseptic and fear. Emergency lights cast everything in amber. A baby was crying somewhere in the back. An old man muttered prayers in Polish. Eleanor guided the last wheelchair patient into position, then finally allowed herself to lean against the wall. She still wore James's jacket, her hands buried in the pockets. Your 8th Air Force, she said quietly, reading his uniform in the dim light. Be 17th? That obvious? A small smile. My brother was a tail gunner. 390th Bomb Group. The past tense landed between them like a brick. Shot down over Schweinfurt, August 43. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Eleanor's voice wasn't bitter, just exhausted. That's what they all say at the funerals. I'm so sorry for your loss. As if sorry could bring him back. As if sorry could fill the hole at the dinner table where Danny used to sit. James said nothing. There was nothing to say. He'd written 27 letters to the families of crew members who hadn't made it back. Every single one had included the words, I'm sorry. Every single one had felt like a lie. You're going back, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Tomorrow, 0600 hours. Transport to England. And you're not scared? James looked at her then, really looked at her, in the amber light, with his jacket draped over her shoulders and her gray eyes fixed on his face. Eleanor Winters looked like every photo he'd seen of Catherine. Not in features. Eleanor was smaller, darker, sharper somehow, but in the way she held herself. Like she was carrying weight she'd never asked for and refusing to put it down. Terrified, he admitted. Every damn time. Then why go back? Because someone has to. Because there are boys over there 18, 19 years old who need old men like me to get them home. James exhaled slowly. And because I made a promise to my wife. Eleanor's eyes dropped to his left hand. No ring. James saw her notice. She died, he said simply, 8 months ago. Pneumonia. I was over Regensburg when He stopped. I didn't make it back in time. Don't. James held up a hand. Please don't say you're sorry. Eleanor nodded. For a long moment, they just sat there in the crowded shelter, surrounded by strangers, listening to the all-clear siren begin its slow wail. I made her a promise, James said softly, that I'd finish what I started, that I'd see it through, that I'd make it mean something. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stupid, right? Like one more mission will somehow... It's not stupid. Eleanor's hand touched his arm. Promises are all we have left sometimes. The crowd began to stir. The all-clear was official. People started filing toward the stairs, back to interrupted lives and interrupted shifts. Eleanor started to remove the jacket. Keep it, James said, until your shift ends. You'll freeze otherwise. I can't take your jacket. You're shipping out in... She checked her watch. 6 hours. Then meet me before I go. The words came out before James could think better of them. 0530. There's a diner on Commonwealth Avenue, 2 blocks from the base entrance. Murphy's. They open early for the military transports. Have coffee with me. Return the jacket then. Eleanor hesitated. In that hesitation, James saw her war. The brother lost, the countless young men she'd nursed who never made a home, the walls she'd built to survive it all. Okay, she said finally. 0530, Murphy's. But only because this is the warmest thing I've worn in 6 months. James smiled. A real smile. For the first time in longer than he could remember. Fair enough, Miss Winters. Eleanor. James. They climbed the stairs together, back into the cold Boston night. The sleet had turned to snow, fat flakes that caught in Eleanor's dark hair like stars. At the hospital entrance, she turned to face him. Captain Morrison? James. James. She pulled the jacket tighter. Thank you. Not just for this. For saying it's okay to be scared. It's the ones who aren't scared you have to worry about. James said, they're either liars or fools. Which are you? Both, probably. He touched his cap in a small salute. 0530, Eleanor. 0530. He watched her disappear back into hospital, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. Then he turned and walked back toward the base hotel, his breath forming clouds in the December air, wondering why a chance encounter with a freezing nurse felt more significant than anything had in months. What James didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that in the right pocket of his jacket, Eleanor had felt something hard and rectangular when she'd buried her hands there. Something that, when she pulled it out in the nurse's station 2 hours later, would make her heart stop. A photograph. Faded, creased, marked with water stains and what might have been blood. A photograph of a young woman in a French resistance uniform, standing in front of a burning German convoy. A photograph with a date on the back, June 5th, 1940. Dunkirk. And a name, Major Catherine Ashford. So, if found, contact MI6 immediately. The same Catherine who James said had died of pneumonia 8 months ago. The same Catherine whose name Eleanor recognized from a file she'd been given 3 days earlier by a man in a dark suit who'd shown her credentials she wasn't supposed to see. The same Catherine who, according to that file, was very much alive and needed to be found before the Germans did. December 15th, 1944. 0517 hours. Murphy's Diner, Commonwealth Avenue. Eleanor hadn't slept. She'd tried. God knows she tried. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw that photograph. Catherine Ashford's face. The burning convoy. The impossible date that predated America's entry into the war by over a year. And James Morrison's grief, so raw it felt like touching an open wound. Now, she sat in a corner booth at Murphy's, the leather jacket folded carefully beside her, the photograph burning a hole in her uniform pocket. The diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease. A handful of soldiers occupied the other booths, eating their last hot meals before shipping out. The radio behind the counter played Glenn Miller, tinny and distant. Eleanor checked her watch. 0522. 8 minutes until James arrived. 8 minutes to decide whether she was going to ruin what was left of this man's life, or possibly save it. The bell above the door chimed. James Morrison walked in, duffel bag over his shoulder, looking like he'd slept about as well as she had. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression softened. "You came," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I said I would." Eleanor pushed a cup of coffee toward him. "Black, right? You strike me as a black coffee man. You strike me as someone who doesn't sleep much." James studied her face. "You look like you've been wrestling demons all night. Occupational hazard." Eleanor tried for a smile. It didn't quite land. Night shift at a military hospital. Demons come with the territory. A waitress appeared, Betty, according to her name tag, probably 60 and tough as boot leather. "What'll it be, Captain?" "Just coffee's fine." "Honey, you're getting on a transport in 40 minutes. Eat something." Betty didn't wait for an argument. 2 eggs, bacon, toast. "On the house. We take care of our boys." James started to protest, but Betty was already gone. "She's not wrong," Eleanor said quietly. "You should eat. Not much of an appetite lately." "When was the last time you had a full meal?" James thought about it. "Tuesday, maybe? Before I got the orders." "That was 4 days ago." "Has it been?" He rubbed his face. "Time's been weird since Catherine." He stopped himself. "Sorry, you didn't come here to listen to a grieving widower at dawn." "James." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking under the table. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm while I do." Something in her tone made James go still. That combat alertness, the thing that kept him alive through 23 missions, clicked into place. "What's wrong?" Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. She placed it face down on the table between them. "When you gave me your jacket last night, there was something in the pocket. I didn't mean to pry, I was just cold," and she swallowed. "James, before I show you this, I need to ask you something. Your wife, Catherine, how did she die?" The question hit him like flak. "What?" "Please, just answer me." "Pneumonia." James's voice had gone flat. "She caught it in October. By the time I got the telegram, she was already in the hospital. By the time I got emergency leave approved," his jaw tightened, "she died before I made it stateside. I never got to say goodbye." "Who identified the body?" "Her sister, Margaret." James leaned forward, and there was steel in his voice now. "Eleanor, what the hell is this about?" "Did you see her?" "The body. The funeral was closed casket." Margaret said. He stopped, said Catherine didn't look like herself anymore, that I should remember her the way she was. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. Then she turned the photograph over. "I think you need to see this." James looked down. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the image of his dead wife standing in front of a burning German convoy, very much alive, wearing a uniform he'd never seen before. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It was in your jacket pocket." "That's impossible. I've never." But even as he said it, James was reaching for the photograph, his hands trembling. He turned it over, read the inscription on the back. Read it again. "So, Special Operations Executive. That's British intelligence." "Yes." "And this date, June 1940. We weren't even in the war yet." "No." James looked up, and Eleanor saw the exact moment his world fractured. "She was a spy." "I think so." "Yes. My wife was a goddamn spy, and she never told me." He let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something breaking. 2 years. We were married 2 years, and she never. "James." "Who are you?" He fixed her with a look that could have cut glass. "Really, Because nurses don't ask questions like the ones you're asking. Eleanor had known this moment was coming, had rehearsed it in her head a dozen times during the sleepless night. It didn't make it any easier. 3 days ago, a man came to see me at the hospital. He had credentials from Army intelligence. He showed me a file. She kept her voice low, conscious of the other soldiers in the diner. Your name was in that file, James, along with Catherine's, and a notation that assets connected to her needed to be located and secured before enemy operatives did the same. Assets. James's laugh was bitter. Is that what I am? An asset? You're her husband, which means you might know things, have access to things that could compromise active operations. I don't know a damn thing. She died of pneumonia. She was a schoolteacher. For Christ's sake. Was she? Eleanor leaned forward. James, I need you to think. Really think. Were there ever times she disappeared? Trips she took that didn't quite add up? Late nights, unexplained absences. Conversations that stopped when you entered a room? James opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it, because there had been, hadn't there? Catherine's teaching conferences that lasted for weeks. The time she'd wake up from nightmares speaking French. Flawless, native French, though she claimed she only knew basic phrases. The scars on her shoulder that she'd said came from a car accident, but which looked for all the world like bullet wounds. The way she'd never, ever talked about her childhood in England. The way she'd tense whenever someone mentioned the war in Europe. The way she'd watch the newsreels with the intensity of someone looking for something specific. Jesus Christ. James put his head in his hands. How did I not see it? Because she didn't want you to see it. Because that's what they're trained to do. Blend in, become invisible, protect their covers at all costs. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. James, there's more. More? What else could there possibly be? The man who came to see me. He said that Catherine Ashford was reported killed in action 6 months ago, during a mission in occupied France. Eleanor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But 2 weeks ago, British intelligence intercepted German communications mentioning a captured SOE operative matching her description, being held at a facility somewhere in the Vosges Mountains. The world tilted. She's alive. Maybe. They don't know for sure. But if she is, and if the Germans realize what she knows, Eleanor didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. James looked down at the photograph again. At Catherine's face, fierce and determined, backlit by flames. At the woman he'd loved and buried and mourned, who might still be breathing somewhere in Nazi-occupied France. Why are you telling me this? He asked quietly. If you're working with intelligence, shouldn't you be keeping me in the dark? Securing the asset? Because you deserve to know the truth. Eleanor's eyes were bright. And because I watched my brother die for secrets nobody would explain. I watched him get on that plane, and I never saw him again, and for months, years, I've wondered if knowing the truth would have changed anything, if it would have made his death mean something more than just another name on a casualty list. What do you want from me, Eleanor? I want you to decide. She pulled an envelope from her other pocket and placed it beside the photograph. These are orders, reassignment papers. If you sign them, you will be transferred from the 8th Air Force to a joint Anglo-American operation. You'll be briefed on Catherine's actual work, and you'll be given a choice about whether to participate in any rescue operation they're planning. And if I don't sign, you get on your transport in, Eleanor checked her watch, 23 minutes. You go back to England. You fly your missions. You honor the promise you made to a woman who, it turns out, might not actually be dead. James stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. Betty returned with his food, set it down, registered the tension at the table, and wisely retreated without comment. I don't understand, James said finally. Why give me the choice? Why not just order me to take the reassignment? Because the man who gave me these orders, he said something I can't stop thinking about. Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. He said, the difference between a soldier and a weapon is that a soldier gets to choose. I didn't understand it at first. But sitting here, looking at you, knowing what I'm asking you to walk into, she stopped. You've given enough, James. You've lost enough. If you want to honor Catherine's memory and leave it at that, no one would blame you. But if she's alive, and if there's a rescue operation, they'll send someone else. They'll find her or they won't. But you won't have to carry that weight. James picked up a photograph one more time, studied every detail. The way Catherine held herself, the determination in her eyes, the small smile at the corner of her mouth that he recognized from 1,000 mornings waking up beside her. If I sign these papers, what happens to my crew? They'll get a new pilot. Johnson's only 19. Kid barely knows which end of the stick to pull. And Martinez will learn from the next captain, just like you learn from whoever trained you. That's not the same. I know. Eleanor's voice was gentle, but you can't save everyone, James. Sometimes you have to choose what battle to fight. The radio behind the counter shifted songs. Bing Crosby now, singing I'll Be Home for Christmas. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone in the diner. James pulled out a pen. For a long moment, he just held it, poised over the signature line. James, Eleanor said softly, whatever you decide, it's the right choice. There's no wrong answer here. Isn't there? He looked up, and his eyes were haunted. If I go back to my squadron, and Catherine dies because I wasn't there to help rescue her, that's wrong. If I sign these papers, and my crew gets shot down because I wasn't there to fly them home, that's wrong. Every choice is wrong, Eleanor. That's what war does. It makes every option terrible, and asks you to pick the least terrible one. So what's least terrible? James thought about Catherine, about the life they'd built on foundations of secrets and half-truths, about the woman in the photograph who looked like a stranger wearing his wife's face. He thought about his crew, about Martinez's awful jokes and Johnson's terrible singing in Stevens, who'd save his life over Bremen by spotting fighters before anyone else saw them. He thought about promises made to the dead and obligations to the living. And he thought about Eleanor Winters, who'd chosen to give him the truth when lying would have been easier. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need an honest answer. Okay, do you think she's alive? Really alive? Or is this just intelligence services throwing dice, hoping something turns up? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. The evidence is thin. It could be a German deception operation. It could be faulty intelligence. It could be wishful thinking by people who don't want to admit they lost an operative. She met his eyes. But I do know this. If there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility that she's alive and could be saved, I think you'd never forgive yourself for not trying. James laughed softly. You're good at this. At what? Seeing right through people. Occupational hazard. Eleanor smiled slightly. Nurses have to read what patients aren't saying as much as what they are. James looked down at the papers one more time. Then he signed. 3 quick strokes. James K. Morrison, binding himself to whatever came next. Done, he said, sliding the envelope back across the table. Eleanor took it, and something like relief, or maybe regret, crossed her face. A car will be here in 10 minutes. They'll take you to a facility in Maryland for briefing. That fast. This isn't the kind of operation that allows for long goodbyes. James nodded. He looked down at his untouched breakfast, then up at Eleanor. Come with me. What? Come with me. James leaned forward, urgent now. You said you were contacted by intelligence. That means they think you're useful. You're a nurse. If there's a rescue operation, they'll need medical personnel. And he stopped himself. I don't want to walk into whatever this is alone. James, I'm not trained for... Neither am I. Not for this. I can fly a bomber and lead a crew, but spycraft? Rescue operations behind enemy lines. He shook his head. You gave me the choice to know the truth. That took more courage than anything I've done in this war. So come with me. Choose to see it through. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she recognized. That same desperate need to make the chaos mean something. To turn grief into purpose. To find in the wreckage of broken promises something worth keeping. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll come. James reached across the table and took her hand. Not romantic, not even particularly gentle. Just human contact between two people about to jump into the unknown. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for what?" "For being honest when you could have lied. For giving me back my wife, even if his voice caught. Even if I don't know who she really was." The bell above the door chimed. A man in a dark suit entered, his eyes scanning the diner until they landed on James and Eleanor. He didn't approach, just gave a slight nod and waited by the door. "That's our ride," Eleanor said. James stood, picked up his duffel, and looked back at the booth, at the cold eggs and untouched coffee, at the ordinary moment that had somehow become the hinge on which his entire life was turning. "James!" Eleanor was at his side, wearing his leather jacket again. "Are you ready?" Was he ready? Ready to learn that everything he'd known about his marriage was a lie? Ready to hunt for a ghost who might already be dead? Ready to trade the familiar horror of combat missions for the unknown horror of whatever came next? No, he wasn't ready. But he was going anyway. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go find my wife." They walked out together into December dawn, leaving Murphy's diner and everything they'd been behind. Neither of them noticed the man in the back booth, the one who'd been reading a newspaper the entire time, fold up his paper and make a phone call the moment they left. Neither of them saw the license plate on the dark sedan as it pulled away. Diplomatic plates, German embassy. Neither of them knew that the choice James had just made had triggered a chain of events that would take them not to Maryland, but to the frozen mountains of occupied France, where Catherine Morrison, codenamed Nightingale, was being held in a fortress that had never been breached. And neither of them knew that this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a trap. December 22nd, 1944. Vosges Mountains, occupied France. 7 days. That's how long it took for James Morrison to realize he'd been played. The briefing facility in Maryland turned out to be a hastily converted barn in the French countryside, where a British SOE officer named Colonel Whitmore laid out the truth with surgical precision. Catherine wasn't just an operative. She was the operative, the one who coordinated resistance networks across 3 countries, the one who'd smuggled out intelligence that had saved thousands of Allied lives, the one whose capture had sent German high command into a feeding frenzy. And yes, she was alive, confirmed by a French resistance fighter who'd seen her 3 days ago, half-starved and beaten, but breathing. The fortress where they held her, Chateau Vogel, sat on a mountain ridge like a predator's jaw. 400 years old, stone walls 20 feet thick, German garrison of 60 soldiers. Impregnable by conventional assault. But James Morrison didn't have a conventional assault. He had 3 OSS operatives, 2 resistance fighters, Eleanor Winters with medical kit, and a plan so desperate it bordered on suicidal. Now he crouched in the tree line 200 meters from the chateau's east wall, watching German sentries pace their routes, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. "Contact in 3 minutes," whispered Marie, the resistance leader. She was 19, looked about 40, and had killed more Germans than James could count. "You remember the timing?" "I remember." Eleanor shifted beside him, her breath fogging the frozen air. She'd barely spoken since they'd parachuted in 48 hours ago. Just focus on the mission with the same intensity she brought to nursing. One task at a time. Save what you can. Don't look at what you can't save. "Eleanor," James said quietly, "when we get inside." "I know. Stay close, move fast, don't be a hero." She managed a tight smile. "I was paying attention during the briefing. That's not what I was going to say." James turned to face her. "I was going to say thank you for being here. For," he stopped, "if this goes wrong." "It won't. But if it does, then we'll deal with it when it happens." Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness. "One problem at a time, James. That's how you survive." An explosion shattered the night. The chateau's north gate erupted in flames as Marie's team detonated their charges. Sirens wailed. Soldiers poured from the barracks, exactly as planned, rushing toward the fake assault. "Now!" James was moving before the echo faded, Eleanor right behind him. They crossed the open ground in 40 seconds, an eternity of exposure, and hit the east wall as the OSS operatives threw grappling hooks. The ropes caught. Held. James climbed like his life depended on it. Because it did. Over the wall. Dropped to the courtyard. 2 guards turning, raising rifles. The OSS men dropped him with silent shots before James could blink. Basement level, northwest corner. Eleanor whispered, reading the intelligence photo from memory. Prisoner cells. They moved through shadow and smoke, navigating by chaos. The diversion was working. Germans were flooding toward the north gate, leaving the interior vulnerable. Down stone stairs, through a corridor that smelled of mildew and despair, past empty cells and ones that weren't empty, where French prisoners press against bars with desperate hope in their eyes. There, James breathed. The last cell, a figure slumped against a far wall, dark hair matted with blood, uniform torn and filthy. Catherine. James's hands shook as he worked the lock. The OSS had given him pics, taught him the basics. It took 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. The door swung open. Catherine. James crossed the cell in 2 strides, dropped to his knees beside her. Catherine, it's me. It's James. She looked up, and for a moment there was no recognition in her eyes. Just animal wariness. The survivor's instinct not to trust anything. Then, James. Her voice was a broken whisper. No, you're not. You can't be. I'm here. He cupped her face in his hands, felt the sharp edges of bones where there should have been flesh. God, Catherine, I'm here. We're getting you out. It's a trap. Catherine's hand shot out, grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. James, it's a trap. They wanted you to come. They're using me to. Footsteps thundered in the corridor above. They know. Eleanor said from the doorway, her face pale. The diversions failed. We've got maybe 90 seconds. James looked at Catherine, his wife, this stranger, this ghost made flesh, and made a choice. Can you walk? I can run if it means getting out of here. Then run. They hauled Catherine to her feet. Eleanor immediately went to work, checking vitals with the efficiency of someone who'd triaged 1,000 patients. Dehydrated, malnourished, probable broken ribs. She needs a hospital. She needs to not be dead. James shot back. Move. They burst into the corridor as German soldiers poured down the stairs. The OSS operatives opened fire, buying seconds with their lives. Marie appeared from a side passage, grabbed Catherine's other arm. This way. Service tunnel. Through a door James hadn't seen. Down steps carved into living rock. Into a passage that smelled of earth and rot and possibility. Behind them, gunfire. Shouts in German. The sound of pursuit. Keep moving. Marie urged. The tunnel exits at the river. 200 meters. They ran through darkness, Catherine gasping with each step, but refusing to slow down. Eleanor kept pace, one hand on Catherine's pulse, monitoring even as they fled. The tunnel opened onto a rocky riverbank. Moonlight on water. Trees on the far side. Freedom. So close James could taste it. The bridge. Marie pointed. Cross and we're in free French territory. My people are waiting. A shot rang out. Marie went down, blood blooming across her chest. James spun, saw German soldiers emerging from the tunnel, rifles raised. Go! Marie gasped, pushing at Catherine with her last strength. Go! Tell them we... Her eyes went distant. More shots. The OSS men returning fire, falling back toward the bridge. James! Eleanor was pulling at his arm. We have to move. But Catherine had stopped, was staring at Marie's body with an expression James couldn't read. She was 23, Catherine said softly. Her name was Marie Beaumont. She loved poetry and hated carrots and wanted to be a teacher after the war. She looked up at James, and her eyes were clear for the first time. I got her into this, into the resistance, into this life. Catherine, I've gotten so many people killed, James. So many young men and women who believed in something I sold them, and I couldn't even tell you. Her voice broke. I couldn't even tell my own husband who I really was. Tell me now. James gripped her shoulders. Tell me on the other side of that bridge. But we have to go. Now. A bullet cracked past James's head. Eleanor grabbed them both, propelled them toward the bridge with strength that shouldn't have been possible from someone her size. Run or die. Those are the options. Choose. They ran, across old stone, over freezing water, through gunfire that seemed to come from everywhere. One of the OSS men fell. Then the other. Just the three of them now. James, Catherine, Eleanor, racing toward the tree line where French resistance fighters were emerging, laying down covering fire. 50 meters. 40. 30. Catherine stumbled. James caught her, hauled her up, kept moving. 20 meters. 10. They crashed into the trees, into reaching hands that pulled them down behind cover, into the controlled chaos and evacuation already in motion. Go, go, go! Someone was shouting. Trucks are waiting. James found himself in a vehicle. Catherine collapsed against him, Eleanor checking her pulse again with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. She's stable. Eleanor breathed. She's going to make it. The truck lurched forward, carrying away from the chateau, away from the river, away from the dead they'd left behind. James held Catherine as she wept. For Marie, for the OSS men, for all the ghosts that followed her from missions he'd never known about. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry. Don't. James pressed his lips to her hair. Don't apologize for surviving. Don't apologize for fighting. Don't apologize for being who you needed to be. I lied to you. Every day for 2 years. You protected me. There's a difference. Catherine pulled back, looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Can you forgive me? For the lies? For letting you think I was dead? James thought about it. Really thought about it. About the woman he'd married, who'd made him breakfast and laughed at his jokes and fit perfectly in his arms. About the woman in the photograph, fierce and dangerous, and fighting a war he'd barely understood. About the woman in his arms now, who was somehow both and neither. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'd like to try. If you'll let me. Catherine's laugh was half-sob. After everything, after I dragged you into this nightmare, you want to try? We made promises. In a church in Vermont, in front of God and about 40 witnesses, for better or worse. James brushed a strand of hair from her face. Turns out worse covers a lot more ground than I thought. But the promise still stands. If you wanted to, I wanted to. Catherine leaned into him. God help me, I wanted to. Eleanor, watching from across the truck, felt tears on her own face. For Danny, who'd never gotten this second chance. For Marie, who died earning someone else's. For James and Catherine, who'd found each other again in the worst way possible and were choosing, against all logic, to hold on. May 8th, 1945. V-Day, Boston, Massachusetts. The war in Europe was over. James Morrison stood outside Boston General Hospital, wearing his dress uniform, watching the celebrations explode across the city. People poured into the streets, crying and laughing and kissing strangers. Church bells rang. Car horns honked. Somewhere, someone was singing the national anthem. Catherine emerged from the hospital entrance, still too thin, but getting stronger every day. She spent the last 4 months in debriefing, physical therapy, and the slow, painful work of learning how to be a person instead of an operative. Ready, she asked. For what? To go home. To figure out what normal looks like. She stopped. To try. James took her hand. Together. They walked into the celebrating crowd. 2 survivors among thousands, carrying their secrets and their scars and their imperfect, hard-won second chance. Behind them, watching from the hospital steps, Eleanor Winters smiled. Then she turned and went back inside. There were still patients who needed her. Still work to be done. Still wars being fought in hospital rooms against enemies that didn't carry guns. She'd tell James and Catherine eventually about the man in Murphy's diner with the German embassy plates, about how the trap had been real, but the intelligence services had known and used it anyway, about how sometimes the only way to win was to walk into the trap and spring it from inside. But not today. Today was for celebrations, for promises kept, for the ones who made it home. Tomorrow will be soon enough for truth.